In this lecture video, we'll take our first look at the different types of microorganisms. Now, micro, of course, means small. So when we think about the study of microbiology and we think about microorganisms, of course, we know we're going to be referencing things that are small. And typically, what we're going to look at are those that are too small to be seen with the naked eye. So we have to use microscopes to view those. If we take a look at this figure here, and this is in section 1.3 in your online book, we'll see here relative sizes. Now this is a logarithmic scale. Okay, so we start with 0.1 nanometer all the way up to 1 millimeter. So here we have, atoms all the way down here, proteins, lipids. Then we start seeing our viruses. So we've got poliovirus, one of the smallest viruses that we know of, flu virus, mitochondria, which we find in our cells, eukaryotic cells. And then we get to the typical size of a bacterium here. Then we get up to red blood cells, animal cells, plant cells, and finally, here at our largest size of here at 1 millimeter, we get to a frog egg. And you can see here the types of microscopes that we'll have to use. Electron microscope to see, viruses. We can't use normal light microscopes to observe viruses, but we can use a typical light microscope like what we have in our lab to be able to observe our cells and bacterial cells and other types of microorganisms. Some light microscopes can view viruses in parts of cells, but that just depends on the magnification of those microscopes, and ours just aren't quite powerful enough for that. Not only do microbes vary in size, but they also differ in structure. So we're going to take a closer look at each of our different types of microorganisms. Now, the one that we'll study the most are the bacteria, which are the prokaryotes. And bacteria are found in every habitat on Earth. They live on us, they live in us, they live all around us. Most bacteria are harmless. The ones that are we're concerned with are the pathogens, those that cause disease in humans or plants or other animals. Those are the ones that we tend to study the most because they can make us sick. But just keep in mind that the vast majority of microorganisms are harmless and in fact can be beneficial to us. Bacteria are considered prokaryotes because they do not have a nucleus. They have DNA, they have genetic material, but it is not confined within a specific nuclear membrane. I talked a little bit about the shapes in my video for Lab 3, so you can watch that and refresh yourself on the shapes there. Bacteria have a lot of different types of metabolism. Some that can, metabolize sulfur, metabolize light, or they can use light, like plants do. We have some that depend on other sources for food. They're heterotrophs, like we are. Some bacteria need oxygen, some don't. So bacteria have developed a wide variety of different niches that they can fill in the environment. Archaea are also prokaryotic organisms, and for the longest time we grouped these with the bacteria because they were prokaryotic, they were single-celled. But now we realize that evolutionarily they're not all that similar. So we've grouped them into separate domains now, And archaea functionally, structurally are a lot like bacteria, um, but their genetics are a little bit different, their metabolic pathways are different, and their cell walls and their cell membranes are a little bit different, and that's why we put them into their own group. Um, Archaea also found pretty much everywhere on Earth, but archaea take on the nickname of extremophiles because they live in environments that are extreme, that where we don't really find other living organisms. For example, this is a picture here in your book. This is from the Morning Glory Pool at Yellowstone National Park. And this is a very hot spring, probably also contains sulfur, as most of the pools at Yellowstone do. And what you're seeing there, these beautiful colors that you're seeing here, are a result of the archaea that live in this environment and live at the different water temperatures that are found there at Yellowstone. Now, when we jump over to the eukaryotic microorganisms, we're looking at domain eukarya. These organisms all have a membrane-bound nucleus, so they're all considered to be eukaryotes. Our first group are the protists. Protists, if nature had a junk drawer, it would be the protists. Okay, these are eukaryotes. They have a nucleus. They're not plants, they're not animals, and they're not fungi. In many cases, the protists really aren't that evolutionarily connected to one another. They're just not as connected to plants, animals, or fungi. So when we look at the protists, kind of this catch-all group, our two main examples of protists are algae and protozoa. Algae are more plant-like. These would be referred to as the plant-like protists. They have cellulose, which is a material that we find in plant cells. They're all photosynthetic, just like plants. They're able to absorb sunlight and extract that and that energy. Algae, typically we find in aquatic habitats. Um, they serve as the basis for food webs and food chains throughout the world. Um, and algae are also commercially important. We use them in shampoos and conditioners and food. The growth media that we use, nutrient agar, is derived from a particular type of algae. So, algae are environmentally important. Um, Now, protozoans, the word protozoa means first animal. So the protozoans are more animal-like protists. They rely on others for food. They're not photosynthetic. Well, some of them are, but the majority are not. They're heterotrophic like we are. They depend on other sources of nutrition. Most protozoa harmless, but we will talk about a few that are pathogenic that do cause some very important diseases in animals and humans. Fungi, also eukaryotes. We grouped the fungi with plants for a really long time because we didn't really understand fungi, but now we realize that they're not photosynthetic. They do depend on other sources for their nutrition. Um, and their cell walls are made of chitin rather than cellulose. And just to kind of give you an idea what that is, chitin is also a material that we find in the exoskeletons of insects. So when you step on that insect and you kind of hear that crunch, that's chitin, and that's what we find in the cell walls of fungi. Now, Unicellular fungi are referred to as yeasts, and we do study some species of yeast in microbiology. Um, some yeasts we use in food. Saccharomyces cerevisiae is what we use to make bread and to make alcoholic beverages. Um, but then we have some forms of yeast like candida, which can cause infections. So we will look a little bit at, fungi in terms of their importance to humans, but also their ability to cause disease. Another form of fungi are the molds. These are seen with the naked eye. You're familiar with mold. You leave something in the fridge too long and it gets mold on it, or you leave your fruit on the counter too long, it gets mold on it. There are mold spores just constantly floating around in the air. Some cause allergens, some produce toxins, and then some can cause disease on their own. The interesting thing about most fungal infections is that healthy individuals don't typically contract fungal diseases. There are a few exceptions, and we'll talk about those later on in the semester. Then we get to our parasitic worms, or our helminths. Um, Parasitic worms are typically macroscopic. We can see these with the naked eye, but the diseases that are caused by these parasitic worms involve the egg stage or the larval stage, which are microscopic. So we group them into microbiology. You've got a couple of pictures here. Picture A is the tapeworm. Tapeworms can grow, they can get up to 6-8 feet long. And then you've got this other image here of an adult guinea worm, which are very tiny, still macroscopic. We can still see them with the naked eye, but very tiny little worms. And they actually erupt through the skin of an infected individual, and we'll talk about these later on. But we do consider the parasitic worms um, in microbiology. Now, our last type of microorganism that we're going to discuss are the viruses and virus-like. I hate to call them organisms because they're not really alive. Viruses and prions, excuse me, are considered acellular because they are not actually composed of cells. They do have, viruses do have genetic material, either DNA or RNA, never both, which is unlike living organisms. And viruses must infect a host cell. They can't do anything, they can't metabolize unless they first take over host cell machinery. There are a lot of different viruses out there. We, of course, restrict our study to the ones who are, who cause disease, but there are a lot of non-pathogenic or non-disease causing viruses out there. Now, when we look at microbiology as a field of study, that's the broad term. Microbiology covers everything. But we can have individualized studies. We have bacteriology, we have parasitology, immunology, mycology. We have all of these different fields of microbiology. We are going to really discuss them all because this is a survey course, so we're going to learn a little about a lot, so to speak. So we're going to touch the surface on all of these different kind of subfields of microbiology.